Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the popular game Wingspan, specifically tips and tricks on how to get your point totals up and how to win this amazing game. The first tip is going to be predatory birds, and predatory birds are going to be defined by this little sinister skull-looking icon that appears on the birds. Now, there's a couple different types of these, and I'm going to show you the two different types. One of them really keys off of rolling dice that are not in the bird feeder, and that can be extremely variable. So as an example, if let's say the bird feeder only has 2 dice on the side, you can only roll those 2 dice and potentially gain the resource from them. This makes this type of predator bird extremely variable, and it's kind of hard to get it going sometimes. Although it's cool to catch a resource on the bird itself, which will net you a victory point at the end of the game, it can be kind of unlikely if you don't have the right dice that you're actually rolling during the scenario. My favorite type of predator bird is what appears on the right-hand side of the screen. This one is fantastic, and it's just simply when you activate, you get to draw a card off the top of the draw deck. So as an example, we take the card off the draw deck. This one only has a wingspan of 18 centimeters. This one is looking to prey upon birds that has a wingspan of less than 75 centimeters. So in this case, we could flip this card, tuck it under the red-tailed hawk, and that's going to net us a victory point at the end of the game. Now remember, you can draw this card every single time this predatory bird is activated. So over the course of the game, you can pull numerous cards and start tucking them underneath. And our game group has found that this is a pretty effective strategy. So a lot of the people at our game table, they really like these predatory birds, specifically the ones that tuck cards. Card tucking in Wingspan appears to be a really viable strategy on how to net yourself a lot of points throughout the course of the game. 2 other types of popular cards that we noticed at our gaming table that really resonate with players are the ones that allow you to tuck a card from your hand and then draw. So this first card kind of portrays that. What's great is that you can cycle through a lot of birds through the deck very quickly and find birds that you actually want to put out onto the table. So part of the key to winning this game is putting out not just birds, but the correct birds, and building some sort of strategy, building some sort of engine that turn after turn you can keep activating a lot of these powers and netting a lot of cards that are being tucked. So as an example, you can take a card from your hand that you don't necessarily want, you can tuck it under the bird, and then that allows you to draw another card. And what's great about this strategy, like I said before, you can just keep cycling through and get the cards that you really want to play. If you don't like a card, no big deal. You can use it to tuck underneath another bird. Now the bird on the right is also another strategy that I see a lot of players that really resonates with them, is that you get to draw 2 cards, essentially, and then you can discard one of them at the end of the turn. So this gives you a lot of opportunity to really kind of search out for those optimal cards as well. It's a little bit slightly different mechanic, but really the name of the game and the strategy is select the cards that work. Now, I think the one on the left I like a little bit better, because when you do the tuck action, you'll actually get a victory point at the end of the game. So if you have a choice between these two, definitely go with the cards on the left. That will net you a lot of points endgame. When you begin a game of Wingspan, you draw 2 bonus cards, and then you're allowed to keep one of those bonus cards, the other one gets discarded. Now, what's kind of interesting about this game is that oftentimes your first bonus cards, they really can set the stage for what you want to do, but by the same token, you're not really committed to those bonus cards because you haven't even put a bird out onto the table at that point in time. So a lot of times that first initial bonus card that you get doesn't quite work all that well, and it's not going to really support your engine. It's not really going to support your strategy to winning the game. So something else that I recommend players do is that over the course of the game, and this is a very easy thing to do, try to get 1 or 2 additional bonus cards to put out onto the table. And as you do that, your options for points and scoring increases significantly. And you can really sort of mid-game to end-game select those bonus cards that kind of fit your overall strategy. And when you have a lot of birds out on the table, when you draw a bonus card, it's very apparent that you can score some points, and you know that you're going to score those points. and you're going to pick that bonus card based upon the birds that you've played out onto the table. So one of the strategies I recommend is just playing one or two of these birds over the course of the game, and these are great. When played, draw 2 new bonus cards and keep 1. So if you just play 2 of these birds over the course of the game, you're going to replace, or not necessarily replace, but you're going to add 2 additional bonus cards, and those are going to be definitely specific to your engine, and it's going to be specific to the birds that you've already put out onto the table. And this is a great way to score points at the end of the game. One thing I want to mention is the bird feeder mechanic, and something that a lot of players overlook is that when the remaining dice in the bird feeder are all identical, it allows you to actually reroll all of those dice, which can really mix up and give you a new set of resources that you can pull from. So when this game starts, it can be a little bit difficult to get the resources that you need to play out the birds that you want to play onto the table. So as a result of that, a lot of players just kind of plod along and they just keep pulling dice out of the bird feeder even when they hit sort of the end of the road. So like in this case, maybe what they really need is a berry, and the only thing that are showing is the the worm icon and the wheat icon. So at that point, a lot of players will just take the die and not even realize that they could have re-rolled it before selecting that. So instead, they could have rolled and obtained 2 of those other icons that they were looking for. So be really cognizant of that, and don't be shy to swap out the bird feeder and change up those dice. Next, we're going to have just a quick discussion about food economy and really kind of getting your engine going. Now, the name of the game for putting the birds out is that obviously you have to have the food needed to put them out into the appropriate habitat. So something that I think sort of new players get confused about is they see these birds with these high point totals and they say, oh yes, I really need that bird. So in their opening hand, they'll take this, Atlantic puffin bird, which is great. It has 8 victory points, but it also costs 3 fish to bring out into the game. And where I see a lot of people stumble is that they take so many turns trying to get those 3 fish that it's kind of like they're being defeated by their own strategy. Same thing with the one on the left. You're going to need 3 different resources. You're going to need an invertebrate, you're going to need a seed, and then you're also going to need a fish food to get this bird out onto the table. It is worth 6 points, and that's fantastic, but by the same token, you're going to spend so many resources that your engine is going to kind of stall out. So what I recommend are some of the birds like on the right-hand side of the screen that are very cheap. This black vulture actually costs nothing. And then the one on the right, you can either pay an invertebrate or a seed to put out onto the table. Something else that you want to be looking for is the habitat itself. So the forest habitats, I recommend that you try to get out as soon as possible. And the reason why is that when you start placing these birds down onto the table, the amount of dice that you can collect from the bird feeder increases significantly. So the more food that you can pull from that bird feeder, you can then start putting out those more expensive birds. So really try to focus on getting one of these green habitat birds that are very cheap in your opening hand if you can, and put it out as soon as possible. It'll help you with resource building and gaining food for future birds. For the forest habitat, it's pretty clear that it's very much into resource generation and food generation. Be on the lookout for birds that when they're activated, you can gain resources and that food from the supply. Now, note that this isn't coming from the bird feeder. So these cards right here, you're gaining it from the supply. There doesn't actually have to be a dice in the bird feeder when you're gaining it from the supply. You can just pull a token and put that into your resources. So imagine now that you have these 2 fairly cheap birds. Now you're activating over here, you're getting 2 food from the bird feeder, and then you're gaining an invertebrate and a fruit as you rotate through your activations. So you can net 4 resources with 1 token. That is extremely cost effective, and it's a very, very easy way, especially early game, to get your engine going. You're going to have a ton of resources, and you can use those resources to put out any bird you feel like, especially even those larger, heavy costing birds. Let's talk about the grassland habitat really quickly. This is going to be the yellow row in your player board. Now, something else that I see a lot of players, they go hog wild on eggs. It's pretty clear that eggs give you a lot of points in this game, especially at the end of the game, because each egg is going to be worth 1 point. So what I see is people do this mad scramble to develop their grassland as soon as possible, and there's so many eggs that can be generated, it's almost overwhelming. Now, the one thing that you have to realize is that some of your birds can have absolutely no eggs and other ones can have quite a few. So I kind of recommend the grassland row in moderation, unless you have like a really heavy defined strategy. So one of the best things to do is get to this point where when you play a resource down, you're gaining 3 eggs. In addition, if you do have a lot of resource generation, you could put another bird down so you could get to sort of the 4th position when you're doing your activations. I have seen people go all the way to the end on lay eggs, and it gets a little bit crazy, and toward the end of the game, there's so much egg generation that it's kind of just too much. So I kind of recommend just getting a couple cheap birds out early in the game so you can be generating roughly 3 eggs whenever you perform a lay egg action. The final row is the wetland habitat, and that's the bottom of the player board. This one is very much in line with card drawing. So a lot of the effects, a lot of the activations are really centered around card drawing. And this can be a very viable strategy, but I also think that you can have too much of a good thing, just like laying eggs. I think that the sweet spot is to get to this position where you can draw 2 cards fairly quickly in the game. I found that players that go all the way to the end of the wetland habitat, it almost seems like they're drawing so many cards they don't know what to do with them, and they kind of have this bog down where they have so many in their hand, they just can't even really use them. So I kind of think the sweet spot is right here where you're drawing 2 cards. If you have some sort of advanced strategy where you got a bunch of wetland birds down here with really crazy activations, I think that's totally fine. But I think kind of know when to stop, know when you have too much of a good thing. So I think this position is optimal and ideal. Here's kind of an odd comment. If you are a new player to Wingspan, you might want to skip some of these pink cards. Now, if you're somebody that's played Wingspan a lot, you probably want to have a decent number of these pink cards. I think where I see new players stumble quite a bit is that they don't quite understand that they can do these actions in between turns. So when another player's going, sometimes they'll do something and it'll activate this effect. I think that in general, a lot of game players, they get fairly distracted, especially if they're in a large multiplayer game. They're talking, they're having fun with their friends, and a lot of times these effects and events just get skipped and missed. Now, some of your more sort of advanced hardcore gamers that really enjoy games, they're going to be keyed into this, and they're going to score a killing with these weird effects going off in between turns. I got to admit, like, some of these cards I really love. There's one of them that lays eggs in another nest. I think that one's really kind of crazy and cool. But like, just be aware of that know what your limitations are. If you get distracted easily, don't play these birds. If you're a decent gamer and can focus, I would suggest playing these cards. A way that you can experience Wingspan that's a little bit more forgiving, especially when you're new to it, is to play the digital version. Whenever you play the digital version, the once between turns cards will actually be easier to play. The application will stop the game and it'll warn you and say, hey, an effect has triggered, and it'll allow you to go ahead and move on. Oftentimes when you're playing with other people, it gets kind of noisy at the table, and sometimes you just simply forget to do it. So the digital version of Wingspan is a great way that you can learn some of these subtle mechanics. Another pretty easy strategy to remember is that round 4 of the game, start producing eggs like crazy. You're only going to have 5 action tokens for the last round of the game, for round 4. And quite honestly, I've noticed in pretty much every game past a person's maybe first game, they're going to start packing in the eggs at the very last round of the game. And the reason why is that you're going to be scoring a victory point for every egg that you're putting on a bird. Now notice that the capacity on a lot of these birds is pretty high. I mean, this bald eagle only has one, but you can go up to 5 on this bird, another 5 here, and all of those can be opportunities for victory points. So as an example, if you use your action cube right here, you can draw 3 eggs, and if you want to burn a food resource, you can get a 4th egg. So think of that as, for 1 action token, you can actually get 4 victory points, and that is the truth. So a lot of times when you hit the last round, it's going to be an egg laying frenzy. So you and your opponents are going to just start laying eggs like crazy. I think it's one of the easier ways to score a lot of points at the end of the game. Something else that you should be on the lookout for is that while you're doing this, you can be activating all of the cards that are in the row for laying eggs, and that can also give you victory points as well. So over the course of the game, if you kind of want to power load one of your rows, I would suggest power loading the lay eggs or the grassland habitat, which is the middle portion of the board. It'll net you a lot of points on that last round. So I kind of want to close this out by talking about the end of round goals. This can kind of sneak up on people, and I want to kind of show that each round, specifically on the green side of this card, the point total for the first place goes up. And for rounds 3 and 4, you can net 6 or 7 victory points just from being the number 1 player for the end of that round. A lot of players kind of avoid this. They don't even really look at it, and that can cause them to lose a lot of points. Now, if you're the type of player that's kind of engaged with it and you're cycling through the cards in the draw deck and you're looking for those optimal birds, try to focus on these as well. So anytime you draw a card, as just a rule and just as a habit, go ahead and just look at this objective board. So literally every time you draw a card, make sure that you're looking at this and you're drawing an optimal bird. Oftentimes, especially if you win rounds 3 and 4, that can net you a lot of points. If you're playing a 5-player game, I've kind of noticed that 2 or 3 players at the table tend to kind of ignore this point total altogether, and then usually you got 1, 2, or even 3 players that are really engaged with this. Those are going to be your top players. They're going to be netting that 4, 5, 6, 7 victory points every turn, or they're going to be getting the second position, which also nets you a decent number of points. This stuff adds up pretty quick, especially if you win rounds 3 and 4. That's 13 victory points, which is a heavy amount of points in this game. So always keep that in mind. Keep your eyes open. Every time you draw a card, look over at this player board. All in all, I think Wingspan is a great game. There are some games that I would recommend. These are party games, and these are nice intro games. One of them is Ticket to Ride. I think that game is a very simple, easy to play game. It's a lot of fun, and it's kind of competitive. You can have 5 people playing. I think Wingspan really falls into that category. I don't find that it's very complex to teach somebody. I mean, quite honestly, like our game group, I think it took maybe 5 minutes, and all of the players just kind of shook their head and they understood what was going on. That's the type of game that you really want for new game players, or if you're having a party. Obviously we have a lot of parties, and oftentimes we got 2 different game tables running, and I think that for those parties I'd probably run Ticket to Ride, and then in the future I'd probably be running a Wingspan table. Now, if we had like a game night, honestly, this is a great game as well. It's not as heavy, and something that's fun about it is that you can have music on in the background. You can be playing a movie in the background. You can be talking with your friends and having fun. You can get through the game pretty quickly, and it's not that difficult. And if you get distracted, you can come back to it often pretty quickly and figure out what's going on. So this game I do recommend. It's not something that this type of game I don't typically play. I found it really, really fun, strangely fun, and strangely addictive. So I want to thank everybody for joining me today, and as always, have fun gaming.